What's up, and welcome in to the Berryman Breakdown. I am your host, Brian Berryman, here with you from FantasyLabs to break down the first matchup of Week 6 between the Washington Commanders and the Chicago Bears. This will be a GPP-focused video where I will break down the DraftKings Showdown slate for Thursday Night Football. We will go over the injury report, how Vegas is seeing this game, my simulation correlation matrix, as well as my lineup simulation tool to give you everything you need to capture those first place prizes on Thursday night. Without further ado, let's break it all down. All right, guys, let's start by going over the injury report for Thursday's game. The Chicago Bears have a pretty clean bill of health going into Thursday night. They appear to be getting Jalen Johnson back, which is going to be a huge upgrade for this defense. They have had a ton of issues with the cornerback position, giving up a ton of yards. As you saw last week, Justin Jefferson ate this defense alive. So getting Jalen Johnson back is going to be a huge help for the Bears defense. N'Keal Harry was just activated off of the IR. He did not practice on Monday and was a limited participant on Tuesday. All the information coming out of Chicago, it appears that he will not be ready for this game, and they will likely be looking to activate him next week. Follow the news as closely as you can leading up to the kickoff on Thursday night to see if N'Keal Harry will be playing. If he is playing, I would expect the Bears to get him involved early and often, as they have the worst group of wide receivers definitely in the league, and potentially the worst the league has ever seen. So they need help in any way that they can get it. So they would likely put N'Keal Harry right out there if he was ready to go. So definitely follow that news leading up to the kickoff on Thursday. For the purposes of this video, I will assume that N'Keal Harry is out for Thursday night. But again, follow that news closely, as it will impact the slate quite drastically if he is in. On the Commanders side of the ball, it does appear that they will be without Jahan Dotson and Logan Thomas in this game. Both did not participate on Tuesday and are not trending in the right direction. We do not have practice information for the Wednesday slate just yet. So check back on the injury report to make sure that those two will be out. For the purposes of this video, I will assume that Dotson and Thomas are out. Other than that, it doesn't appear that there's any major concern on the Commander side of the ball. De'Ami Brown was limited after his big game last week. Carson Wentz was limited as well, but I do believe that both of those players will play in the game on Thursday. And for the purposes of this video, I will be assuming that they are in. All right, let's move over to how Vegas is seeing this game. There's really no way to spin this one, guys. This is one of the ugliest primetime games we'll see all year. We had an open at 40.5 as an over-under that has since been bet down to a measly 38 points. And then we had the Commanders open as a 1.5 point favorite that has been bet down to a pick'em. Yeah, I mean, there's really no other way to spin this. This is going to be an ugly slate. There isn't a ton of offensive productivity going on either side of the ball. Both teams have really been struggling offensively. So I would agree that this is going to be an uglier type game, especially it being off a short week, which makes it interesting from a strategy standpoint. And I will get into it a little bit later, but there are a lot of players that are brought into optimal lineups in ugly games like this because touchdowns carry so much more weight than they would on a game that's shooting out. A single touchdown may be enough to bring a random player into those optimal lineups. So I'll go over that a little bit more in detail as we start to break it down a little bit more, but wanted to give you a heads up on where my mind was with the overall scope of how this game is going to be playing out. All right, let's move into the correlation matrix for this game. If you guys are not familiar, if this may be your first time watching the video, basically what I do every week is using the FantasyLabs simulation engine. I plot every simulation that we run and how each player performs against one another. This is going to give us a correlation value. The higher the value, the higher those two players are correlated together when it comes to their success, right? So the highest correlations that we're going to see are going to be quarterback and wide receiver combinations more often than not. And the most negative correlations we're going to see are defense and opposing offense, right? So that obviously makes a ton of sense. This week, the highest correlation we have on the board is Justin Fields to Darnell Mooney. I touched on this earlier. The Bears have a disaster of a wide receiver room. Darnell Mooney is the lone bright spot on this team. He gets force-fed a ton of targets just because simply the other guys can't really get open. So he is the highest correlation on the slate to Justin Fields. Makes a ton of sense. Right behind Darnell Mooney, we have Equanimeous St. Brown. I wouldn't go too crazy on this correlation, guys. I am a Bears fan. I watch a ton of games. I rewatch the games because I have a problem. But I just don't know if I would be taking this correlation too far when it comes to Fields and Equanimeous St. Brown. The lack of sample size in this offense and just the lack of explosive plays here. Yes, he is the wide receiver 2 in this offense, but that is not something that should be bragged about. Again, this receiver core is really weak, but I wanted to point out that there is a nice correlation there based on our simulations between Justin Fields and Equanimeous St. Brown. The third correlation is Cole Kmet at 0.27. So that would round out the Bears side of the ball. On the Commander side of the ball, the highest correlation, Carson Wentz to Terry McLaurin, followed closely by Curtis Samuel down here at 0.31. Simulations had Logan Thomas in this game. Again, I am going to assume that he is out, but if he does end up playing, he is a nice option as we're seeing a solid correlation at 0.31. But this offense is concentrated and runs through McLaurin and Samuel for the receivers on the Commanders. All right, going to move into my simulation tool. This is a tool that I built that will give me a number, a percentile as to how likely each player is to wind up in the flex and the captain spot. I simulate the slate 10,000 times to come up with 10,000 optimal lineups, and this is a percentile where each player falls within those categories. I highlighted these 5 players because 75% of the optimal simulated outcomes had these 5 players as the captain. Now, I touched on this a little bit earlier. Most times you'll see me highlight 80, 90 percentile outcomes for the simulation. After these 5 players, there is a large range of players that make up the additional 25%. And it's because of kind of what I discussed. We have a low total. There's going to be a low amount of touchdowns. Maybe for the entire game, we might have 4 touchdowns total, 2 on each side of the ball. And even that might be high. We could be looking at 3 or even 2 total touchdowns in this game, which is going to bring due to the nature and the randomness of touchdowns in general in football, it's going to bring more players into consideration for captain this week. So usually I'll say, hey, don't stray too far away from this list, but I can't say that with confidence because there's just so much randomness that's going to be associated with this game due to the low scoring nature of it. If I had to say Justin Fields is my favorite captain, he possesses the highest ceiling on the slate due to his rushing upside. If he runs, he could run for 50 yards and a touchdown and instantly be the highest scoring player on the slate before all his passing points get taken into consideration. So he would be my top choice on the slate, followed closely by Montgomery and probably Curtis Samuel after that, again, due to his dual threat receiving and rushing upside. But just want to say, you can get creative in a game environment like this. Feel free to go off the board into some tributary randomness, embrace the randomness in a game like this, because a single touchdown can completely sway how the entire slate plays out in general. All right, let's dive into the strategy portion of the video where I will be going through how I think the field will be building their lineups and how we are going to leverage that chalk lineup construction and leverage that on a way to potentially see the game a little bit differently than the field is seeing, but yet still put together solid lineups on our way and hopefully our path to first place. The field, I believe, will be clicking Justin Fields in the captain spot quite a bit. My simulations had him at 24% in the optimal. I think his captain ownership will come in around the 20% range. If I had to guess, check back here on Thursday when we get projected ownership for captain and flex. But I do believe he will be the highest owned captain just because of his dual threat upside that we just touched on. Following the Justin Fields captain selection, I believe a large portion of the field will then be clicking on Mooney, as we discussed. He is the wide receiver 1. He gets a lot of the targets here in this offense. And it just makes sense to pair your captain quarterback with a pass catcher. I do believe that they will be pairing him with 2 pass catchers quite a bit. And Cole Kmet makes the most sense, I believe, just from the salary standpoint in this offense. We are getting a captain quarterback with 2 of his pass catchers, and we still have 7,400 remaining in salary to fill out or average remaining in salary to fill out the last 3 spots. This lineup construction is just going to be, honestly, it's going to build itself, and it's going to be pretty easy. So I do believe that this is going to be a chalky start to the rosters. Following that, I see a lot of people clicking on Wentz and Samuel. So right now, basically what you're getting here is both passing attacks from each side of the ball filled out with still 3,400 to remain in this lineup. So you can fill this out in a variety of different ways. Cam Sims could fit in here. Dante Pettis could fit in here. John Bates could fit in here. So there's a lot of different ways that this roster could be filled out. And I think this is going to be a pretty chalky construction. Now you could say, oh, well, I don't know if people are going to be building with the quarterbacks in mind because the game is going to be ugly. So a lot of people might be building for the running backs. Fine. That's a very fair point. So we could see a lot of this situation where we have Montgomery in the captain followed by the Bears defense and both kickers potentially. Right. So, sometimes people will build with this mindset thinking that they're being slick or sly. But in game environments that are this ugly, it's going to be a popular construction for people to just say, oh, it's the Bears and the Commanders. This is going to be the ugliest game I've ever seen, akin to what we saw the Colts and Broncos. I don't think it's going to be anything like that. That was a historic game that was actually quite fun to watch because it was so boring. But I do think that there is some merit to building like this. But if you're going to go this route, just keep in mind that it's not going to be as unique as it would on a game total that was 45 to 50 points. A large majority of the field is still going to be building with this ugly game in mind, right? So if you're going this route, let's pay attention to how we are going to use the remaining spots here to differentiate ourselves. If this game happens to break out into this terrible slugfest, let's give ourselves an opportunity for first place by trying to capture those low-owned plays to fill out a roster like this. So for me, the way I'm seeing this game is I do believe that Justin Fields is the best captain. So I will be starting off a majority of my lineups with that in mind. But knowing that a large portion, I would say over 60%, maybe even higher, of the people who put Justin Fields as their captain will likely also have Darnell Mooney, which we talked about, right? So I'm going to try to not necessarily avoid this build, but in builds that include Darnell Mooney, I'm going to want to make sure that I'm adding a low-owned piece to those lineups, right? So let's go into the lineup optimizer here so I can show you guys a rule that I might be putting together. So let's start off by saying in lineups that include, Justin Fields as the captain, we'll have at least two of, this is just like a normal build, a normal rule that I would put for most quarterback captains. You want to have definitely at least one, but I like to put at least 2 pass catchers. The reason being, if Justin Fields is the highest scoring player on the slate, he's likely going to bring along a pass catcher or ideally 2 pass catchers with him on his way to that high scoring game, right? So let's make sure that we are pairing these guys together. So Darnell Mooney, Cole Kmet, and Brown, and let's put Dante Pettis in there. Dante Pettis is catching some flack in Chicago for the drop passes that he's had this season. There are some rumblings that his playing time will be reduced, but until we see that, again, this wide receiver group is very, very thin. So there's rumblings that Velus Jones Jr. will take over a portion of the snap percentage in Chicago. So let's add him in here as well, just in case that situation does play out. We're going to have a lower owned play in Velus Jones Jr. that is taking over a healthy portion of the snaps that were originally being taken by Dante Pettis. So anyways, in this rule, what I would like to do is add another one here that says in any lineups that include Darnell Mooney, because what I was just explaining to you guys, if I have a lineup that's starting with Justin Fields and including Darnell Mooney, a large chunk of the field is going to be starting in that direction, right? So I'm okay with that. We know that the correlation is there. There's a high likelihood that if Fields is having a good game, Mooney is also having a good game, but I need to be cognizant, and we need to be cognizant that the field is also going to be thinking that. So then we need to go a level further and say, okay, if that situation does play out, let's make sure that our rosters have a chance at being unique enough to continue to leap past the field in these instances where this situation does play out. So I'm going to make sure that I use at least one of the following players, right? We just talked about how I think Velus Jones Jr. is going to be a low-owned play. Let's go back here to the board. Let's take a look at some of the other players that may fit the bill when we're coming to low-owned plays that are on the field a bit, that could score that random touchdown, that could shoot us, our low-owned players, past some of those chalkier players that are in a lot of our opponents' lineups. So what I would do is kind of come through here, look through FantasyLabs, and take a look at the recent snap counts for a lot of these players for Washington and for the Bears to figure out if there is somebody that is on the field quite a bit that might be able to capture some upside for us. So Cam Sims played a little bit last week, about half the snaps, but only got 2 targets. He's historically been a low upside player. It's not really someone that I would be looking to target. John Bates, healthy snap counts over his 5 games so far, a decent amount of targets. And it appears, again, this is low upside, but a $3K salary, I believe that he'll probably be somewhere around the 25% own range. This would be someone I'd be looking to add into that Darnell Mooney rule. Again, looking to differentiate our lineups. Equanimeous St. Brown could potentially be a player that doesn't get a ton of looks. Again, this slate is so ugly, guys, that I'm just trying to wrap my head around like what people are going to do. Usually it's a little bit more straightforward, but we're talking about 2 pretty ugly offenses here. So it's going to take a little bit more brain power and a little bit more thought as to how we think the field will be building. At his price point, he's on the field a ton. I do think that people will still be clicking on Equanimeous St. Brown. Dyami Brown with his blow up last week, I do think that people will be clicking him as well, but let's keep in mind that he wasn't really on the field a ton last week, only about a third of the snaps, only had 4 targets, but had 2 explosive plays that really inflated his DraftKings scoring. I think people will be looking into the recency bias there, so I'll probably be staying away from Dyami Brown. So honestly, in this lineup, I would probably be going to John Bates, and I would probably be looking to add in one of Dante Pettis or Khalil Herbert. Now, Khalil Herbert at his price point is not going to be a super popular play, but he is getting a good amount of opportunity and run in this Chicago offense. David Montgomery was out for this game against the Giants, which you could see his snap count did increase quite significantly in that game. Last week against the Vikings, Montgomery was back and his snap count did decline, but he is still a part of this offense. The Bears love him as a change of pace back, and they tend to stick with the hot hand with whoever is performing the best for that game environment. So what I'm going to do is go back in here, and I am going to add to this Mooney rule, again, to keep these lineups unique. We're going to add John Bates, and we're going to add Khalil Herbert. So any lineup that I'm afraid that there's going to be a Fields captain and a Darnell Mooney in that captain spot, I'm going to get lineups in the optimizer here that are going to give me 3 lower owned plays that will help differentiate my lineups, right? So let's go back here. Let's make sure that Justin Fields is locked in as the captain for this rule and for these lineups that I want to make. And when I generate these lineups, any lineup that has Darnell Mooney in it will have at least one of those players that we identified in that rule, right? So this is kind of how we can use FantasyLabs in the optimizer to really make sure that we are differentiating our lineups here and making sure that we are not being duplicated when we are going for first place in these large field contests. So that's going to do it for this week, guys. I appreciate you tuning in for the Berryman Breakdown this week. If you don't already, I would appreciate a follow on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @13ERRYMAN. If you don't, please like and subscribe to these videos as well. These are coming to you free of charge, and this helps to keep the videos coming to you in that manner. So thank you very much. Again, I appreciate you watching, and good luck on Thursday night. Have a great rest of your day, and we will see you next week for week 7. Have a good one.